Hey, Rusty.
Hey, how are you, Jason?
Good. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you are the first participant of this new podcast I'm launching.
Well, then no one else will have to think like this is a tough act to follow.
I uh, I was telling you before the call, I started it out because there are a lot of museum folk out there and thousands, right? Thousands of local, state, and small institutions. And I wanted to try to give the people that care about those places a little bit of a voice in however a humble way that I can. So again, I appreciate you coming on, and we're going to start off by I would just love to hear about. Well, first, tell me where you are now, what institution you're with, and or tell the viewers or listeners what institution you're with, and just maybe a elevator version of what you do there.
Okay. I'm executive director at PA Museums, PA standing for Pennsylvania. We're Pennsylvania's statewide museum association. We have about 300 members. We provide professional development opportunities, networking opportunities, try to connect people in the field, post jobs for members on our website. And we also do advocacy work, primarily at the statewide level, but a little bit with them at the national level for their advocacy day.
Cool. And how long have you been with PA Museums?
Well, LinkedIn tells me I'm now at 14 years. I just had
14 years.
just had my work anniversary.
Wow.
Hard to believe.
So what over the years, what do you think has been one of the biggest challenges for PA Museums?
Um, well, our association used to be pretty heavily subsidized by state funding. We were seen, really as a support organization for the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. We received grant funding to present our annual conference back then. We had grant funding for a minority internship program, technical assistance grant, and for our general operating. And at that time, we had 4 full-time employees. We are now 1.75. The state funding went away back in 2009 or so, and so we, really had to have kind of a come to sermon meeting, about were we relevant without that support? How would we continue? How would our operations change? And they did a lot. And about the same time, we were going through sort of this technological revolution. And back then, the organization was called the Pennsylvania Federation of Museums and Historical Organizations. You can see why we changed the name. It's too long. But the people who were on the board had a technology development back in those days that really positioned us well, to be a smaller organization with about the same amount of reach, because people were accessing, our programs and our resources in a different way that we were prepared for. So we were in pretty good
Yeah.
shape, all things considered.
And you were able recently to secure a pretty big pot of funds for some accessibility work, right? Can you just share a little bit about that?
I would not want to toot my own horn on that one. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission has a lot of initiatives going on around, the 21st century and how they want to move ahead. And part of that work is, of course, DEIA work. Um, they had an idea to create kind of a national leadership model, um, a self-assessment tool, like a STEPS program almost for museums
Mm-hmm.
to have a look at
ASLH.
what they're doing with what they're doing in accessibility, diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. PA Museums was invited to be the nonprofit partner for that work, and we submitted an application to IMLS that was awarded. So, we're right in the middle of that. It's a 2-year grant. We're going into year 2. Piloting the self-assessment tool has been really hard during the pandemic, but I think we're making progress, and it's been really interesting to try to stay within the scope of the grant. There's work to be done in DEIA. It is a bottomless pit of opportunities, and threats, and it's exciting work, and it's got to be ongoing. Like, you can't just do it for 2 years and be done. So
Sure.
we had to be careful not to approach the project with so much enthusiasm that we couldn't get anything done,
Right.
So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm really enjoying it. It's something different, after 14 years of doing kind of many of the same things on a yearly cycle. You have
Right.
this new project in your lap, and it's like, wow, this is fun again.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll try to. I'll put the website, of course, in the description in the podcast. But maybe I'll put some other links in there about that too. So, who is Rusty Baker? Just tell us a little bit about. It's interesting. You talk to some professionals, and their passion for history or material culture or the arts goes back to when they were a little kid. That wasn't the case for me. I didn't really pick things up until I was in college. But do you have any story like that, or how you got into the field?
There's usually a set piece story I tell about how I got into the field.
Okay.
And I can relate that one. But what you just said about what was it in your childhood, that brought you to this, that got me thinking along different lines. I remember going to an Army Navy store in Lebanon, Pennsylvania with my dad when I was a kid, and him to buy me a pith helmet because that's what archaeologists wore. we lived north of the city of Lebanon, where the Union Canal used to pass through the county. There's a project that was funded by a lottery in 18 something, approved by George Washington, and they started construction in 1825 and built this canal to bring coal and lumber from the hinterlands of Pennsylvania down to the Susquehanna River, and to the Schuylkill River, to get to the port of Philadelphia. And I grew up around ruins. There were old locks, old canal locks. There were old canal beds, old
Mm-hmm.
buildings that had been, toll houses for that operation, and all of this along a creek, that the Swatara Creek, did all the time. So every new flood would bring, a new exposure of something, and you could see the history around you. There was a reservoir that provided water for that canal that was an earthen dam, and it washed out during Hurricane Agnes in 1972. I was 6 years old. I learned to ice skate on that lake. It's like 10 acres of water.
What was the name of the creek and the lake?
The lake itself was called Waterworks, and the creek was the Swatara Creek. The dam broke and dumped all of its water down into the Swatara Creek, and so these acres and acres of water were now, an archaeological dig. Boats had sunk there, rowboats, fishermen's boats. People had thrown bottles in there in, 1890. They were just sitting there on the bottom waiting for you to find them. People were swimming their wedding rings or dropped coins when they were swimming. So we were always finding stuff when I was a kid, and I think that made me really conscious of history uh, in a local sort of way.
Hmm. And you had that seed planted early, and then fast forward, sort of in getting into your professional life. What was one of your first jobs?
Wow. Well, I went to school to be a teacher, secondary English teacher, and I was substitute teaching, which is, not really a great way to go about trying to establish yourself in life. And
Yeah.
summer came along, and I was basically in my basement playing guitar, and I got a phone call from a dad who ran an art gallery, and they were looking for somebody. Their business was expanding, and they wanted to get somebody in that they trusted and that they knew and they could teach something. So I went to work.
This was like a kind of a local art gallery that did local shows.
A pretty high end art gallery in Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Called Gallery 444. It was owned by Bruce Johnson, who's a pretty well known artist in the area, and at one time he was known nationally. He sort of shifted between pen and ink drawings that were humorous, or sometimes satirical, sometimes very serious, and watercolors, which were a lot more reflective. I used to love to watch him paint with watercolors if I could get a chance. He was just working so fast. It's like, how do you do that? It's the most unforgiving medium in the world. I did a lot of shipping and sort of hands-on work, assembling frames. And at one point, we were getting into dealing with things like corporate installations. Hershey Foods, like, they wanted art in all their offices, so they called us, and that was a big job. So after that, I was working again as a teacher, and then relocated and started working at an art auction company that did sort of one night, one-off affordable art auctions in the Philadelphia suburban area. And then I saw a job posting for a director of operations at the Susquehanna Harrisburg. And the job description was like everything.
Susquehanna Art Museum in Harrisburg.
And, it was part accounting, it was part human resources, it was part preparator, it was fundraising support, membership. The staff there was really small. I think there were 3 of us, and we all worked like 180 hours a week. It was just an insane work environment. But we were all young, and we all really liked each other and what we were doing. And it was a fantastic workplace. We had a young director, Jonathan Van Dyke, who was absolutely just visionary about contemporary art. He had, no problem making a cold call to a big New York City gallery and getting them to loan you something incredible.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Did you do any? Were you at that point doing more managerial things, or were you still doing preparatorial work?
I was doing all of that. Okay. We had main galleries that switched out every quarter, and we had one gallery that was sort of a local artist members gallery that we were switching out exhibits in every 6 weeks. So I was pretty much always covered in paint for like the entire time I worked at the Susquehanna Art Museum.
So when just a little divergence. When there is a painting on the wall, this is for maybe your listeners that aren't as familiar with museum settings as we are, but when that thing has to come down, what maybe it has to be shipped back to another place, or if it was on loan. I mean, what is when you were doing that work? What's the first thing that you have to do? I mean, I guess like at home, I just take a painting off the wall and lean it up against the, down the hallway, but it just doesn't work that way, I guess, in museums.
Well, some of it does. Some of it's exactly the same, at least if you're doing it right.
Okay.
The key to moving art is like when it's moving, it's at the most danger it's ever going to be at. So, hanging on a wall or sitting in a storage room in a crate, there's probably not much that's going to happen to a work of art when it's stationary. When you're moving it from one place to another, if you were an insurance company, you would say, that's where the risk is, right there. Because
the moving.
Yeah, we're people and we make mistakes. Artwork gets damaged even by the best art handlers. But you'll want to know where you're putting it, where it's coming from. You have to have your path clear. You have to be able to communicate along that path to make sure that everything's safe, especially when it's big and you have a couple of people on something, that's not just you carrying it. But people have done entire workshops on what to do or not to do there. I think the only difference in the museum world from how it is in your home is, that the hanging height in a museum, you want things to be eye level for your average person walking in, maybe a little lower if you have a lot of children who visit. And in your house, you're hanging it based on a lot of other things, like the geometry of your couch or how low the light hangs in that room, or that sort of thing. But we used
I tend to hang things very high in my house. Like I like to see things up, but that's because my particular preference.
I had sort of a flood happen on my walls with my children. As they grew up, things came down. Like kids go up, things you can damage go down until they're at the same level.
Yeah, that's a great way of describing it. So, all right, so let's get back on. So you're at the Susquehanna Art Museum, and you're doing your thing there. Yeah,
and we moved the entire museum from Strawberry Square, which is a sort of an urban mall space, to an old bank building at 3rd and Market, Whitaker Science Center. And moving a museum, even a museum that didn't collect, the Susquehanna Art Museum was not a collecting organization. It was still a lot of work to move all of that stuff and to rebrand, do all of that work, reestablish yourself in a new location. And in 2005 or so, it was a very different organization. I think I was the last one there of the original group. Everyone else having moved on, and the board of directors at that time was already thinking about the next space, the next biggest space, collections, all of that jazz, and they didn't necessarily see me in that picture of their future. So there's about that I took a job with U.S. Art Company. They're based in Boston, but they've got branch offices nationwide. They're sort of one of the leaders in art shipping, handling, and of course storage. And I was there about a year down in Maryland with the Landover office. And we worked with bigger museums in DC, private collectors, corporate collectors. And that was a lot of fun. I learned a lot about, how the logistics of it works.
I mean, you're potentially moving some interesting, lions and whale skeletons and big 18th century paintings, all kinds of crazy stuff. I imagine.
it ran the gambit. We did an awful lot of antique furniture as well, which was really a new place for me to be. Like heavy and big and old. Yeah, I got that.
Yeah.
And I was really pretty homesick though in the DC area, and an opportunity came up back in Pennsylvania with the Federation, then Federation of Museums. So I wasn't down there, I don't think, more than a year, and came back up to Pennsylvania, and here I am now.
14 years.
Yeah. Wrote out a couple of recessions.
Yeah. So you came on right as director of the Federation?
No, I came in as membership and marketing coordinator.
Okay. So
I did the membership and the newsletter. Both things I'm still doing. So we're we don't have.
Yeah, and who was the director at the time?
Deborah Philippi was the director then, and she had been the director for quite some time. Prior to that, she had run one of the grant programs at the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. So she had been with the state for a while, and knew the political landscape and knew the commission well. He was well suited for the role.
So the current landscape now, from what you can tell with PA museums, not the institution, but the institutions out there in Pennsylvania. I mean, I guess the go-to is funding, of course. They're all struggling with funding. But what are some of the things that you've observed in recent years that are, some of the challenges but opportunities for a lot of the institutions in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I think when, I used to every year put together sort of a things I'm watching list for Pennsylvania's museums to kind of get my head around what is it we're actually watching for. And, funding was always kind of top of that list because without it, it's unimagithere. How people would do this work without some kind of funding. But there are, a lot of other things that happen in and around museums that I think keep me interested in the field. One of them is leadership and staffing changes. I talk about people at the Capitol all the time, people who work in the Capitol with the lawmakers. There are third generation state workers. So the door plates change, but the people are the same. And you see this in museums all the time too. You run into someone you haven't seen in a while, and you ask them where they're at, and they're not where they used to be, but they're somewhere else, and they're doing fine. And you see people kind of come in and out of jobs, or advance at a particular institution, climb the ladder, if you will. That's always pretty interesting to me, to watch people progress in their careers. And depending on the case, I may feel jealous or not. But that's all part of the scales.
Let's tease that out a little bit more. I mean, because I've observed the same thing. It just seems like people are in an institution. I don't know. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but 3 to 5 years, and then they're moving on, or something's happened. I mean, to be at an organization for 7, 10 plus years is, you really stuck with it. I mean, what are your, just, there's no right or wrong answers, but what are some of your off the cuff thoughts about why that's happening, why that happens?
I think people get frustrated, that things don't change quickly enough, or they're not changing at all, or they need to change themselves, that they're not getting in a particular place. I don't want to open the can of worms of compensation in the field, because I think that's a challenge. That it's a conversation. I don't know if anybody really wants to have a polite conversation about it. These jobs are normally not well compensated at smaller organizations, and you got to wonder how people survive. Are they married to somebody, or do they have a partner who is supporting them through that? Do they have family means do they have a second or third job? How are they doing it? And how are they doing it year after year? So I think that's definitely, part of it. I think it's difficult to work with boards of directors. At PA Museums, I'm kind of blessed. I have a board of directors made up of museum directors who themselves, know a lot about boards and how they work. But at the Susquehanna Art Museum, there were times when it felt like the board of directors, was not on the same page as the staff. And in fact, their generosity of their time as volunteers often messed things up, because we didn't have staff to do things. So the staff and board roles got blurry. Here, you're throwing a reception and your board president is pouring the wine, and who orders who around in that, if somebody needs to do some ordering around, I don't know how that's going to work very well. With staffing in general, I think it interests me because I care about the people who work in the field very much. And if they move to another organization, that's from our statewide association's point of view, that can actually be kind of good, because then you may know somebody somewhere you didn't know somebody before. And part of what we're trying to do is connect people.
Yeah. I think you touched upon a lot of those challenges for any position, whether it's a curator or an executive director or an educator. And I think that board staff rapport is crucial. And in my experience, what makes that so challenging too is everybody talks about term limits and how wonderful they are, and you have to have term limits. And for the most part, I agree with that. But when you have new leadership every 2-3 years, and then those folks, to no fault of their own, are asking the same questions and rightfully so, poking at the same type of challenges, that gets over time, that gets very wearisome for staff, because they sort of say, we've already been down this road 1,000,000 times. And it's hard for them to convey that they've been down that road 1,000,000 times. And it's hard for the new board members to realize that, because they're new board members. They don't know, and they want to see the institution improve and grow. So it's just interesting, the sort of double-edged sword with, I guess back in the day, you would stay with an institution.
Yeah, you're a board member for life. Board member for life.
Now we have staff that cringe when they hear something like that. Yeah.
Rightly so.
Yeah.
I know it.
So what? Go ahead.
In my time with the association, I've been asked to explore developing a member benefit for our association members that is, health insurance for all museum professionals in the state of Pennsylvania. And let me tell you, that's never going to fly. It's never going to happen.
Sure. But how many times have you been asked to explore it?
Yeah. And it becomes an interesting dance. You try to find who's really interested in it, who's interested enough in it to talk to an insurance salesman. Then the insurance salesman says, we want all of your information. And then the museum says, oh, we can't give you that. And then it's over.
Yeah. Well, you just touched upon sort of on the fringe there, the health insurance issue that a lot of institutions face. I mean,
that's a real crisis.
When I was with the Cumberland County Historical Society here in Pennsylvania, I mean, it was a big deal to, like, I came into that job thinking, wow, they're offering a health insurance plan with dental and vision, and they offer it to the full-time staff. To me, I came into that situation sort of pleasantly surprised, whereas other institutions, they just sort of helplessly throw up their hands and say, we can't offer it. Yeah. So you're the PA Museums Board now. You have an interesting mix of people from different institutions.
Yeah, we sure do. I think the board is also getting a lot younger, and I don't know if that really matters, but it matters to me. I want fresh ideas and the energy that board members can bring is great, especially when you're a small organization. You actually need work to come out of committees and people to maybe spend a little time doing something, burn a little midnight oil or what have you. And we've tried to make sure the board is representing our membership as much as possible. And also, Pennsylvania is almost like 3 states. You've got the city-state of Philadelphia and the Steeler Nation, and then sort of the area in between where all the deer live. You have to have people from all of those regions if you're going to really represent Pennsylvania. So I think we're doing a good job with that too.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to explore with you a little bit is just to dig in a little bit more with the idea of fundraising in museums. Talking with colleagues from other states, and I want to get into that too a little bit, but fundraising is, I've always had an interesting perspective about it. It's almost like if you build it, they will come, sort of a thing. And that balancing act between the constant asks, but then also demonstrating the efficacy of your mission and your outreach and your purpose and your vision, and that attracting more income. But are there any particular issues related, in Pennsylvania that you've thought about in terms of fundraising? I guess it depends on size as well. Any tips that you could give to maybe even some of it doesn't have to be PA institutions, but institutions in other places?
I have a lot of thoughts about fundraising and what the trends are. I think right now, while we're in sort of the pandemic trend, we're seeing sort of custom-made programs from foundations and government agencies that are providing some support. And I'm really pleased to see that, and I hope it continues, through the recovery, which is probably going to take a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
But you have this traditional sort of mix, this healthy mix. Think of it as a cookie mix. You don't want too much sugar or too much egg or too much butter. It has to be, all the ingredients have to be there. So you need your government support, private support, foundations, corporations, your membership program, your special events, and this all works together, sort of like a three-dimensional puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Budget nugget, you know. The trouble is, it's always been a little out of whack, and one of the things that I've seen over and over again is, organizations, executive directors being tasked with making a pretty big ask without much support from board members. And,
Mm-hmm.
like I said before, the most effective kind of fundraising that, an executive director can do is in tandem with a board member who is a peer of the philanthropist that you're approaching. It's such an
Mm-hmm.
uneven playing field for somebody who makes $30,000 a year to ask somebody for $100,000 gift.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be golfing the same places. They're not going to be having brunch the same places. It just doesn't. It's not an even trade. And how that's going to feel for the donor is probably as uncomfortable as it feels for the nonprofit employee who is, perhaps, his next year's wages are going to hinge on the answer to that question.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pressure to put somebody under, in a situation where they're already at a disadvantage of sorts.
Yeah.
And I feel, that corporate sponsorship is another one of those sort of difficult places where, a nonprofit, an arts or cultural history organization finds a company that kind of likes what they're doing, and they make a good pitch. Maybe there's an exhibit that somehow ties into that they make or whatever. It could work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you go and you make that request, and then that company has a completely different picture in their mind of what you're doing, what you're capable of in terms of marketing,
Mm-hmm.
and how much decision making they're going to be allowed to have about how this thing ultimately looks or feels or whatever.
Right.
And that's just an unequal partnership created out of sort of like a blind date. You know, it can
Yeah.
work or it cannot work.
Yeah. I've had a lot of experience of, quote unquote, just go down to the local business and they'll give you some money. And it's really hard for smaller institutions to get, well, not only smaller business support nowadays, but this idea of just running off to some big corporation like Walmart or Target, it's just unreasonable in a lot of cases. It's when you were talking about fundraising with someone who's a peer of a funder, it got me thinking of a story where I went with a board treasurer, and we drove down to Wilmington, Delaware to meet this board treasurer's peer, someone that they knew. And we had all of these fancy proposals and spreadsheets and our plans for the future. And before we could even get out of the car at this gentleman's home, he said, I want to go to eat breakfast. And we went to hole in the wall it just gives this place too much credit. We went to this place and we probably sat there for an hour and a half while we just nursed eggs and hash browns and orange juice, and I'll have another thing orange juice. And the entire breakfast was pretty much just, how are the eggs? How are the hash browns? And just quiet. We didn't get into any business. But we sat there and we just had breakfast with this person, and we talked a little bit about what their interests were, and we talked a little bit more about the eggs and the hash browns. And after about an hour and a half, he says, well, I guess you guys want to come over to my place. And so we went in to his home, and he sat in his recliner, and he says, well, what are you doing? We told him a little bit about what our plans are, and we had a particular project that we were interested in sharing with him. And he sat back in his recliner and put his feet up, and he had these really old slippers on, big fuzzy slippers. And he started to get choked up. And he says, well, I'm going to do this for my mother. And he said, I'm going to send you $50,000, and then in a couple months you'll get another $50,000. It was a $100,000 ask. And my takeaway from that was, and you probably had similar experiences, that people, they want a little bit of a connection, and when they're given at that level, they're sort of tired of the fancy propose. They just want to know what you're doing and how much is it, and is there a way to honor someone in their family. And that was the case with this gentleman down in Delaware. I just thought it was really eye-opening for me, because we thought we were having all of these fancy brochures is the way to go, but it turns out in that particular case it wasn't. Maybe in other circumstances you need the fancy poster or flyer or whatever. So
yeah, I had an experience like that, and it almost felt like I was floating above myself, watching myself have this meeting with a donor. It was a very disassociative.
An out-of-body ask. You got to tell me more about that.
Somebody else asked that guy for money. It wasn't me. I was.
They were peeling you with the jaws of life out of their living room.
Yeah, very strange.
Out of body. Well, without giving too much away, or the person, or what was it like? I mean, what was the approach? And I mean, did it sort of go differently than you had planned in your mind?
The approach was planned out pretty well. It was a tour and then a sit down meeting, again with the folders and all the papers, and the choices of things that you might want to consider. And as it turns out, the board that I was working with, their development committee came out first for that meeting, and I felt
what
they came out in force. Like we had sort of envisioned this meeting as like a 2 or 3 person meetup, maybe 4.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turned out, there were 8 of us there. It felt like we were almost a baseball team. There were that many of us, It's like too many people here. And I think experience would teach most of us that if you want something to not get done, ask a bunch of people to do it, because everybody's going to think somebody else is going to do it, and they're not going to do it. So we're in this meeting, and it's clearly over, and no one has asked this guy for support. Nobody has like taken out the hammer and gone, this is what we're talking about.
Make the ask, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, I guess it's me, and that's how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, it's one of the humps that I think that organizational leaders or whoever they're making the ask, whether it's curators, they know why you're there too.
Oh, sure.
So don't make it awkward for them. I mean, aren't you going to ask me? I mean, maybe give me the opportunity to support you.
Yeah, there was just so much wrong with that meeting, Jason. I never want to relive that day and ever again.
So I was playing racquetball with a guy a while back. I was telling him some of the challenges and just different things. And he's one of these sort of genuine folks that read the book about how to make friends and influence people and ask them about themselves and that sort of thing. And he said, well, what can I do for you? Can I make a donation? And, he wanted to he saw the challenges and he had the fun and there you go. Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Wish they were all like that.
Yes.
Well, I have a little bit of a lightning round to end, unless you had anything else you wanted to share. Do you want to plug anything coming up or?
We have our annual conference coming up in April. Should be some good sessions and some also informal events along with that. So keep an eye peeled. You can follow us at Twitter at PA Museums it's PA_museums. That's where most of our information ends up. If you want to follow us, you can email me and get on our newsletter list. I'm at rusty.pamuseums.org. I wasn't expecting a lightning round, so what you got?
All right. So I'm going to give you two options, and the answers are going to reveal a lot about your personality. Okay? So you can elaborate if you want. If you don't want to elaborate, you can just say, I'm not elaborating.
Okay.
So Star Wars or Star Trek? Star Wars. Okay. Any elaboration?
I waited in line to see A New Hope like 5 or 6 times the year it came out. There's no going back from that. I'm all in.
All right. Monopoly or Dungeons and Dragons?
Monopoly. Yeah,
is it the grasping for money?
I'm kind of fascinated by Monopoly because if you play by the rules, it lasts forever. But if you bend the rules, it's a shorter game. I used to love playing Dungeons and Dragons, but I think at this point in my life, I've played it almost as many hours as Monopoly, and I prefer to be the shoe.
Well, now they have the version. Get it done in quicker, less than 3 hours or something. Monopoly version.
Yeah.
Okay, and the final one for you: a juicy cheeseburger or homemade Thai food?
Wow, that's a tough one. I actually do a good bit of cooking, and I do make some Thai dishes, so I'd probably go with the cheeseburger because that's something I don't get.
Well, Rusty Baker, I really appreciate your time today and sharing some insights, and I think hopefully listeners will there'll definitely be some takeaways, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being the first one.
Well,
and I hope you've enjoyed it.
I enjoyed this too. Thanks a lot, Jason.
Yeah, you take care.
You too. Have a good one.
All right, bye.